Welcome everyone to another webinar, part of the Enology webinar series here at Texas A&M Texas AgriLife Extension Services. My name is Andrea Bottazzatu. I am an assistant professor and Enology extension specialist with Texas AgriLife. And today we'll be talking about quercetin precipitation in red wine. Before we begin, just a little bit of housekeeping. This webinar will last for an hour. The presentation will be about 50 minutes long, and then we will have a Q&A session at the end. Please feel free to type your questions in the chat box or the Q&A box on your screen there, but we will address your questions at the end of the webinar. Also very important, at the end of the webinar, all participants will receive a survey about the webinar. I would very much appreciate it if you took 2 minutes to fill out that survey. It's very important to me and my program, and it helps me keep the program going. So please, please, please fill out the survey at the end of the webinar, and thank you. And I would like to introduce our presenter today. Here to talk about quercetin is Gabriele Goreli. Gabriele is a wine expert, designer, and brand builder born and raised in Montalcino, Tuscany. In February 2021, he was declared Italy's first master of wine. Congratulations, Gabriele. Gabriele can trace his wine roots back to his grandfather, the smallest renowned producer of Brunello di Montalcino. With a degree in foreign languages and a strong passion for marketing, in 2004, he founded Brookshire and Gorelli, a design agency specializing in fine wine visual communication. In 2015, he founded a separate wine sales and marketing consultancy company, KH Wines, with clients ranging from wineries to importers and fine dining restaurants. He regularly attends national and international wine competitions as a presenter and judge. And he will be talking today, as I mentioned, about quercetin precipitation in red wine. Much of the data presented here today is part of Gabriele's research. So without further ado, I will pass it on to Gabriele. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. And hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here to talk about this topic, which has been my lockdown topic. When 2020 started with this idea to cover a sort of real world issue, which is quercetin precipitation in red wine. This is an extract from my Institute of Masters of Wine research paper, and that work was more focused on Brunello di Montalcino, and that's why you will see from time to time slides coming from Brunello. So what we are talking about an unsightly sediment that comes into the bottle even if the wine was bottled clear. It is a sediment that doesn't alter the wine's taste, and of course it is unexpected and qualifies as a fault. We're talking about what I have abbreviated as an acronym as quercitin aglycone QA. So it is an antioxidant UV-protectant flavanol, and this is of course part of the polyphenols of a wine, and this is found more even increasingly often in wines, in red wines especially, probably because of the incidence of stress induced by climate change. How to recognize quercetin is very important. You can see this bottle here on your right-hand side, and you see that there is a degree of cloudiness here and there, and this is only noticeable when backlit on or the wine is poured. But as a cellar manager or a winemaker, how to recognize the precipitation of quercetin? These two photos were took respectively at soutirage, the first one, and the cleaning of a barrel after an aging period, the one on the right hand side. You can see there is this substance, it looks like yeast, but it's actually quercetin. And of course, it is quercetin aglycone. We will investigate what an aglycone is more in detail. In the bottle, as I showed you, you have these sort of granular, slimy sediment that can be filtered out, and this is the case of your right-hand side picture. And this is preserved in a laboratory, and it's used to make standards for analysis. So quercetin starts, of course, building up in the grapes. That is the grapevine that uses quercetin as a protective response to light exposure. And we know from several studies that the more you expose the grapes, the more quercetin you will have in your berries. Of course, it is known that it is not only light stress, but it's also water stress and heat stress that let the plant sort of protect himself, that it's usually resulting in higher amount of quercetin. What we're talking about? We're talking about 100, for example, in 2007, 180 milligrams per kilo of grapes found in grapes from the Montalcino area, while 1/10 of this amount was found from grapes from northern Italy. That means that because of probably the charge of the plant, so the amount of yield the plants had, and of course other climatic conditions, we do expect to have more quercetin in warmer areas. So how does quercetin behave, and how the forms of quercetin are built? We do have the glycosides, so the quercetin that is bound to a molecule of sugar. So you have the glucoside, the galactoside, and the glucuronide quercetin. We will focus on talking about all the three together as QG, so quercetin glycosides. Then the precipitation you saw, it is quercetin aglycone, the QA I was telling you about. How does it work? You have high solubility in grapes and must of the quercetin glycoside, which is the form you find quercetin in the first place. And then over time, this solubility decreases via enzymatic or acid hydrolysis, resulting into quercetin aglycone. As you can see in this graph I draw, you have from grapes to wine, and the timeline goes towards the right, and resulting in less quercetin glycosides and high amount and concentration of quercetin aglycone. About the solubility, of course, quercetin glycosides, because of the high amount availability of ppm of course sugar in wine, even if the wine is so-called bone dry, it's high, has a nice solubility in wine and must, so up to 125 parts per million, while price from studies in 2009 and 2001 says quercetin aglycone only has 5 ppm of solubility in wine. Of course, this study started because the problem was found actually 20 years ago in a Brunello di Montalcino served in Berlin to a customer that found this precipitation in its glass. So from there, an entirety of studies started from this appellation, the appellation of Brunello Montalcino. And what was done, it's to check the production of quercetin from 27 very well-known grape varieties and Sangiovese itself. As you can see, this is a PCA analysis, and you can see Sangiovese to be found in the quadrant that has the highest amount of quercetin and quercetin glycosides. So all the other varieties, which are not, in this case, exposed, just saying not Sangiovese, are in another area. So we do have a lot of quercetin in Sangiovese. Then what is the problem with Sangiovese, especially? The fact that the solubility of quercetin aglycone is enhanced by the amount of anthocyanins. And as we know, Sangiovese doesn't have a lot of anthocyanins, and there is a very unfavorable ratio between polyphenols, tannins especially, and anthocyanins. So you can see in this graph that the more Malvin you add, so the more concentration of anthocyanins you increase, the higher the solubility of quercetin. So this leads us to another problem, the fact that anthocyanins aren't stable over time. So they are decreasing constantly while the wine is aging, both in bulk or when bottled. At the same time, as I told you before, the fact that the quercetin glucosides converts, hydrolyzes to quercetin aglycone results in higher contents of course, QA, quercetin aglycone. So what is a safe threshold to have? Price says only 5 ppm are soluble, but from what I researched, out of almost 6,000 samples analyzed, only the samples that had more than 15 ppm of QA had an actual problem of precipitation. So I am considering as a safe threshold 15 ppm of quercetin aglycone. So these three would be the strategies to deal with. We can invest our efforts in the avoidance of quercetin or in the reduction of quercetin actual builds in grapes and in wine, or we can invest our efforts on the removal of quercetin, especially aglycone, from wine, or in the stabilization. This is our crossroads. What I decided to do is to invest my time in the center option, so in the removal of quercetin, because you don't know if the stabilization will be definitive. Actually, it won't, because it's a process. So the wine is alive, and the stabilization cannot guarantee that, especially wines like Brunello that are long-lived and are known for their ageability, wouldn't have these precipitation faults over time. And of course, it is difficult to understand how a vineyard works in a specific, the peculiarities of different terroir, and in order to let it avoid or reduce the production of quercetin over the season, especially if you are in an area like we are that is dry farmed. Now, so the scope of my study for the MW thesis was to find whether there are organic options for fining wines for precipitating QA at the pre-bottling stage, so that you don't have any precipitation after the bottling. Also, after this experiment, and I did also a survey with a few producers from the area, which was sort of representative, because I covered in volume almost 48% of the appellation. So it's a good wine. It's relevant to talk about that. To do that, I took 2 samples of Brunello di Montalcino 2017, which is the Brunello that has been bottled this year for release next year. And I selected 5 organic compliant fining agents. I made it 2 scenarios. So one scenario way higher than the safe threshold of 15 ppm, the H scenario, high scenario, 22 ppm, and the L scenario, which is slightly over the safe threshold, 16.5 ppm. As you can see, the two wines are totally different in terms of their analytical forms. So you can see that high scenario has almost more than double anthocyanins and 50% more polyphenols compared to the low scenario. It was because, of course, one was from a top-end site, single vineyard, lower yields, everything, while the L scenario was a cooler site with lighter and fresher soils, more sandy. I mean, no much concentration as the clay soil that you had in the H scenario. This can already give you an indication on how quercetin builds on grapes and therefore in wines. This was just to check that I had pretty much the same amount of dissolved oxygen bottling cask and after bottling. And then I selected these fining agents. Why did I select these fining agents? Because for EU regulation, we do have the opportunity to use these three fining agents, potato protein, chitosan, and chitin glucan, as organic approved fining agents. And therefore, I carried out some preliminary tests in order to understand whether there would be within each category of fining agents to select specific products from specific producer in order to get to some results. And I ended up with 5 fining agents. 3 of them are the chitin glucan, the chitosan, and the potato protein, but 2 of them are charcoal. One is a decolorized charcoal, and the other one is deodorizing charcoal. Now, this is for just to tell you about the legal restraints. In EU, we cannot use deodorizing charcoal on the wine, directly on the wine, but we need to have membrane treatment to separate the wine, the permit, and the concentrate, and treat on the permit. And we cannot use decolorizing charcoal before bottling, but we're limited to the end of the year of the harvest. So after you have your wine all racked out of its skins, you cannot anymore use decolorizing charcoal on reds. So these are restraints that are only for Europe. For example, the New World, as we like to say, US, Zealand, and Australia, you don't have these sort of restraints. And keep that in mind because it will be at hand later. So I also, looking at the EU regulation, took a list of the selected fining agents, the recommended dose rates from the producer, the legal limit, and then I split that in half or in a third, and I selected some dose rates to carry the tests with. As you can see, we have now 6 fining agents. The first line, the PVPP, is the one I didn't talk to you about. Why? Because it's not authorized in organic farming, but you can use it to reduce quercetin and aglycone, because a substance that has a strong adsorbent power, and therefore it reduces oxidation, or at least oxidative phenols, and doing that also carries down a significant amount of quercetin aglycone. So these, up to this research, to the state of the art, was the only known fining agent to make sure that you get rid of the quercetin in excess before you go in bottle. And of course, I repeat that this is not allowed in organic winemaking. So I tried also to use it as a benchmark, because many people use that with success, but also they said it was impactful on the wines in the sense that it gave a sort of lightness to it. The wine resulted less weighty, a little bit more empty. This is sensory, but it's important also to know. I created few tests that have combined action. So potato protein plus chitin glucan, or potato protein plus kisan, and the other way around. And I didn't, of course, I didn't mix the two charcoals, which is Granucol, GE, and Black Super, with the other compounds, because it wouldn't be authorized to be used. This is the experiment test codes. So everything was in a spreadsheet, all in this table, so I could track it back to some test codes, and all the bottles I read the test with. I had the repetition, so a second bottle, and their codes on the label. I used the methodology to identify not only the amount of quercetin, which is not a a specific methodology as the UV recognizes. It is an HPLC methodology, of course, but there's no a specific method to carry it. I've been carrying these in one laboratory that has been developing together with the University of Siena the actual methodology to measure quercetin. So that it's pretty accurate to me. It probably won outside of Italy. I had the opportunity to check this out with in New Zealand winemaker that had problem with quercetin in the Oaks Bay, and they couldn't get an actual mensuration that was accurate for quercetin, but we can get to that. Also, I wanted to check whether my treatments had detrimental quality action or impact in the wine. And how did I do that? I measured the total anthocyanins and the total polyphenols before and after the treatments. The experiment was divided in 4 days and was carried out on the actual 75 cl or 750 cl bottles, and it was carried out like a general fining test, so a bit of agitation, and then 18 hours of undisturbed stainless steel bottles. While I was doing this test, I had the opportunity to interview several wineries here in Montalcino, and I split these interviewees between their different growing regimes, from conventional to the biodynamic, their area and vineyard from less than 5 hectares to more than 50, and from their different vine densities, from less than 4,000, which is now the limit, the lower limit you can produce Brunello with, to more than 5,000. Also, this was varied in areas, slopes of exposition, and in altitude. So we had a sort of a snapshot of what the appellation looked like. These were semi-structural interviews. You can see in the quadrant here, you have the map of the appellation of Brunello di Montalcino. In indigo, you see the vineyard distribution, while in orange, you see the vineyards from the actual interviewees. It does look like most of the interviewees come from the southwestern quadrant, but it isn't. It is just the fact that the biggest player of the appellation are vineyards in that quadrant, but we do have a lot of evenness among the appellation, speaking as as representative of each quadrant, each slope. So there is knowledge about quercetin, and this knowledge from these wineries started from like 15 to 10 years ago. So these wineries are just starting to check the quercetin in more than one moment in the wine production. There have been a lot of precipitation over time for a total of 11 wines within these 20 TVVs. And it was interesting to see that the precipitation issues were especially in two cool vintages here, 2013 and 2014, and which is pretty much controversial, because if we say we have more quercetin buildup when the climate, when the weather is hitting a lot with heat and light and drought, but how these wines manage to be more stable? I sort of took it that way. I think that wines from warmer vintage have higher QA levels, high quercetin aglycone levels overall, but they do have a higher concentration of anthocyanins. Therefore, they have highest solubility levels. On the other end, wines from cooler and wetter vintages can lack the required anthocyanin concentration to keep the QA stable. So I'm designed for, let's say, more earlier consumption. So now we are talking about how to avoid or minimize QA precipitation, and we try to split it into viticultural, winemaking, and aging and pre-bottling. So viticultural will be try to protect the grapes. So the grapes that you were exposing, the bunches that you were deleafing to get more life, more light, and more ripeness, you now want to protect them. And also, not only protect them with the leaves themselves, but also some wineries started experimenting some coverage, like kaolin or blood orange extract, in order to protect the actual skins. We do not have any results of these two spraying treatments, because these were just carried for this year, so 2021, which is a year which has been very difficult because of the spring frost, and after very hot July and August with a lot of light and dryness, a lot of droughts. So an actual vintage that could result in very high quercetin levels. Now, interesting stuff about winemaking, because my research stimulated another research of another student at the University of Florence, and he tried to understand whether using more air in vinification, you could get higher rate of conversion from the quercetin glycoside to quercetin aglycone, and therefore treat it or promote its precipitation over time while aging it. And it actually succeeded. So I said, if you use limited or none addition of SO2, and you pump twofold the wine's volume in open air per day, you will have a drop of QA levels. And this is very interesting. Of course, we need to take into account the fact that somebody may want to produce a wine that has a more reductive style. So this has an impact on the actual taste of the wine, the sensory of the wine, as maturation have. So here in Montalcino, there are 24 months mandatory cask or barrel aging, but many of the interviewees use longer maturation. Some go over 36, other three go over 42 months in cask. And these are practices that were traditionally aimed to improving the stability of the bottled wine. So while doing that, at our days, they still have less opportunity that this quercetin will precipitate in bottle, because they have quercetin that has been precipitated, as I've shown you in the first couple of slides, in the actual casks or botti. In pre-bottling, many of them use this check and the same pretty much safe threshold that I identified of 15 grams per hectoliter, per liter, and they use a dose rate of PVPP from 10 to 15 grams per liter in order to get rid of these. Of course, this has two problems. One is that you cannot do that in organic winemaking, as I told you, and the other is the impact on the actual sensory profile of the wine. We're getting back to the tests. Tests were then analyzed, and I decided to define as successful each test the ones that had equals or less than 15 ppm as a result of quercetin. So we were starting from 22 for the A scenario and starting from 16.5 for the low scenario. All the tests, all the finding agents at all their dose rates that had the opportunity to bring down these concentration of quercetin equal or less than 14 ppm were considered successful. As you can see, you have here in this column the success, and the charcoal and the PVPP were successful in every single test. We only had a few successful tests, and only for the low scenario, with chitin glucan and some mix of chitin glucan and chitosan, or chitin glucan and vegetable, which is the potato protein. So these successful tests are then analyzed in turn. I had QA removal in absolute terms, QA removal efficacy, so per unit of added fining agent, the cost, the QA removal efficacy versus cost effectiveness, and the efficacy versus impact on quality, so considering the amount of stripped polyphenols and anthocyanins. And of course, I have the two overall responses, combining this number for the two scenarios. And these gave me the opportunity to create a sort of index. I will go through that very, very shortly. So you can see the first products, so the yellow one, the green one, and the red one, which in turn are PVPP, deodorizing charcoal, and decolorizing charcoal, were the ones that were able to remove a lot of quercetin, up to 18 plus ppm with 50 grams hectoliter in the case of decolorizing charcoal. But what does it mean? So what does it mean? You should go and check whether you can remove quercetin for the amount per unit of added fining agent. And you see that it's pretty looking decreasingly high efficacy the higher the dose rate. This means you can get the most out of your fining using less product, which is also fine because you will decrease less quality ideally. Let's see how it works. You see, both for the low scenario and the high scenario, you have an equal quantity of fining agent that removed different amount of QA, but it was dependent from the initial concentration. So the higher the total concentration of quercetin aglycone, the higher the effectiveness in removal per gram of fining agent added. So we have two things here. One is that you can use less product and be more effective per unit of product that you add. And also when you have higher amount of quercetin in the initial wine, with these few grams you add of charcoal, you can get as very, very high effectiveness compared to a wine that has less, like low scenario, quercetin concentration. Costs. You can see a strange high line on the red columns. Why is that? Because for the EU laws, we cannot use the rising charcoal directly on the wine, as I said. So we need to use this membrane treatment, which raises a lot the cost per removed ppm of quercetin aglycone. I am, in this case, showing that whether in these other graphs, these chitin glucan and the combination of fining agents didn't really look like a column. In this case, these are very high because you need a lot of it, and you need to pay a lot for products. So you would already know that it's not the right way to go. No potato protein, no chitin glucan, and no chitosan for quercetin fining. I tried to use this very good-looking magic quadrant, as we use in finance, to combine the removal efficacy versus the cost effectiveness. You can see, as usual, the top right quadrant is the one that makes the difference. And you can see we're all talking about different dosage of the colorizing charcoal. So this is the one that costs less, and this is one that has the better function. Very interesting. And the same I did with impact on quality. So if you're not considering the cost, which I guess you would, but if you're not considering the cost, but only the impact the treatment has on quality, so on the removed amount of anthocyanins and polyphenols, you will find that, yes, PVPP is doing well. You see the yellow dots, but also charcoals are actually very, very good in their job. But we have another thing now. We have two scenarios, as I told you. The take-home message from these tests is that the lower scenario has been very highly impacted by these treatments quality-wise. You can see in this graph. So you can have only, if the anthocyanins were only 16% in general removed more than the high scenario, if the average quercetin aglycone removed was averaging 15% as well, the removed polyphenols after the treatment in the lower scenario is 3 times more in the this scenario compared to the high scenario. This tells you a lot, so that wine that has a more subtle less strong analysis would be severely impacted by this sort of treatment, regardless if they are PVPP or granules or in carbon charcoal or decolorizing charcoal. To better understand that, I developed this index, which combines all these previously seen data. And you can see that you have a scale from 0 to 6 and from 0 to -6, and the commendability of the treatment, it's higher the higher the number gets. And you can see that PDPP, despite its restriction by law, it's has an high commendability. Deodorizing charcoal has almost the same commendability. Also, the costs are into this index, but for wines like Brunel, high-end wines, they don't really weight much in this sort of treatment because you want to be, perfect when you're on the market. Your reputation must be perfect. But what you have here, you have decolorizing charcoal that has the highest commendability possible. And what is the first line? It is the dosage of 12 grams, so the lowest dosage tried on the highest, on the high scenario. So as you can see, pretty much always the highest scenario gets the highest commendability, while the lowest scenario, still being at low dosage, it's always second. Low commendability, or I would say no commendability for any other product for reasons of cost, quality detrimental actions, impact, and of course, effectiveness, actual effectiveness to reduce quercetin in wine. What does it mean? Decolorizing charcoal is the way to go for me in terms of stripping out quercetin aglycone from a wine in pre-bottling. And also deodorizing charcoal can be an option, also because it is less impactful on the amount of removed anthocyanins and polyphenols. But as I told you, ULO requires combined membrane treatment for the usage of deodorizing charcoal, and this adds not only significantly to the cost, but also to the practicalities that you may have in your cellar, because nobody here has a membrane treatment machine in their cellar, not even the biggest wineries here. So you always would have to call some contractor to do that, and that would really be bothering the efficacy of this product. So in my research paper, I said that the consortium, the association of the producer here, should really look for a derogation to find a way. Having said that, we know that we have a safe threshold, to find a way that permits to the wineries that have these threshold exceeded to have the opportunity to treat with deodorizing charcoal directly on the wine without any other treatment. This is pretty much it. I was targeted to finish 45 minutes, so we do have 2 minutes more, and thanks for that. And I will answer to all your questions with pleasure, if possible.
Thank you, Gabriele. That was such an interesting presentation. I love how you took it just all the way through, looking at costs and efficacy and commendability. I thought that was really remarkable and very clear from a winemaker's perspective. I guess I would have a question about sensory evaluation of the wines treated. Did you do any kind of sensory, or did you kind of evaluate the color, at least visually, after these treatments?
Yeah, no. The color and the points for the color and the amount of anthocyanins. So the actual reaction for the entirety of the color was checked, and it's not part of these experiments because this experiment is focused on saying what does it work for quercetin removal and not how it would behave on a sensory on a sensory panel. I think the sensory panel is pretty much the next step to do, which I have to say I didn't write about, but of course I investigated and we did some trials and we could recognize tasting blind PVPP treatments in a flight. You could really tell the one that is very watery and diluted in your front part of the palate, it has been treated with PVPP. Now, there was constantly that sort of sample, regardless of the dosage rate, the dose rate used was treated by PVPP. Interesting fact is that you have charcoal that are less impactful. You cannot really spot the charcoal treatment, but the fact that charcoal, of course, are oxidizing a bit. You can feel it probably in the tannins. The tannins are a bit rougher. So what to do? These products here, which I didn't comment to use, especially the OVF, which is the anovegan finesse, or the quinox, which is the N, we tried in combination or after the charcoal to do what? To help the sedimentation of course, the defining treatment, but also to address some specific, issues in the sensory profile. I'll tell you something more. If you have a wine which is a bit oxidized and you treat with charcoal, you probably end up in a wine that it's a bit over the peak of the oxidation that would expect to have before you put your wine in the bottle. So you use the quinox, which is the chitosan on that, and you feel like the wine it's gaining a bit of compactness back from it, even if you treat it with charcoal. Or the other way around, if you have a wine which is very shy, subtle, reduced, you use the anovegan finesse combined to the charcoal, and you give more volume, you give more expressivity to the wine itself. So these three other non-charcoal substances, defining agent, except for the vegetable, we never get really interesting and relevant results, are useful, if not to find against quercetin or in a minimal part, but to address some stylistic and sensory part that you wanna cover. Yes.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense, and thank you for sharing that with us. And one more comment from me. Would you say, legal limitations aside, deodorizing it and decolorizing charcoal would be about as effective, even including the costs, if there were no legal limitations?
Yes, you see?
Yeah.
You see here, high efficacy, low loss.
Mm-hmm.
So, of course, in this line, this axle, you find that decolorizing charcoal has a bit more efficacy, but at the same time, it's slightly lower on the sum, sorry, slightly higher on the sum of lost polyphenols in total anthocyanins. So I would use, probably what I would do is to use 2 different treatments in 2 different weeks with deodorizing charcoal. So if I had to treat for aiming for 10 ppm of removal, you can see here in the where is that? In absolute terms, you see, for example, you aim for 10 you see HG12, it's so the high scenario that had 22, and we treated with 12. But after having carried out this trial, I would recommend treating, fining 2 times 6, not 1 time 12. And 2 times 6, I tried, and I actually tried in bulk in a wine which wasn't destined to, it was destined to distillation, but we had the opportunity to try that. And we put 2 different fining treatments in 2 different weeks, and the efficacy was higher. That was very interesting to me.
Great, thank you so much. Any other questions from the participants here? Please type them in the Q&A box or the chat box.
I was very interested to see where you have been experiencing this sort of precipitation, or if you've seen.
So if anybody here has experienced this or thinks they have experienced this, can you please let us know? Can you please comment here and let us know where you are and what your experience was like?
It's a bit, there's a code of silence for quercetin. I know that. I mean, there is an actual code of silence.
It's not only quercetin.
But I was very happy to find a chief winemaker in New Zealand that actually was able to share with me their problems. Was the loss of color and antioxidants less when the treatments were done in 2 separated fining applications? Yes, yes. So you have more efficacy on the quercetin itself, more absorbance on that, and pretty much, if not less, it was low. So I would recommend doing that way. Yes. And I had this guy that showed me that some varieties like Grenache, Merlot, even some Cabernet Sauvignon, which was sort of considered immune to quercetin precipitation, produced in the Oaks Bay and sealed with screw caps. They had incredibly high amount of quercetin glycosides that in few months resulted in a precipitation after the conversion to quercetin aglycone. So they do have a problem there. Also because outside of these classic areas, so Burgundy or Barolo especially, so Piedmont and Tuscany, there are no laboratories that have an actual experience on quercetin itself. That's why there is a lot of work to do, and I feel like UC Davis with Professor Waterhouse and Professor Ice did a very impressive job in the early ages of quercetin, because I remember Professor Waterhouse sending this email to these winemakers that found this slimy sediment, saying that could you try using polyvinyl polypyrrolidone, so PVPP, in order to reduce that, because it is a polar molecule and it will be as absorbent as you need to literally strip quercetin away. And that was it. I mean, that was theory, but was actually the solution until I sort of demonstrated that you can do the same or better. As you can see, you can do pretty much all the times better in terms of absolute removed quercetin compared to PVP with charcoal, the 2 types of charcoal. And specifically, I would use the name of these charcoal because out of my fining tests, as you can see in these, the preliminary ones, so this one, you see, I had several decolorizing, 4 decolorizing, 4 deodorizing, but there was only one deodorizing that had the same efficacy of the best decolorizing. That is very. From the Barossa Valley, let me see. I have quercetin sediment in a 2020 Grenache Syrah Mourvèdre. It's fruit 2 months after bottling. For what I've read and studies conducted in Italy, blending should help with quercetin precipitation. Yet for us, the only one ever to show quercetin deposited was a blend. Exactly. You gave your answer after your question. If you blend, and this is demonstrated from my experience, but many consultant winemaker will tell you, and if you blend, especially using wines that it's younger compared to the one that you're going to bottle, you promote precipitation. Don't ask me why. I think that there is a degree of how can I say, nucleation. You bring it to the wine. You bring too much life to the wine to be a bit holistic, but you promote actually the precipitation. It's sort of it's a sort of seeding, which could be an option, unless the fact that you have extremely high costs for pure quercetin, like for a few 50 grams cost 500 euro, and you need to put these in order to do the sort of seeding like you do with the tartrates, and to promote its precipitation. So you add a bit to precipitate more, but it won't be the case. It will be, Jamie, it will be very interesting to know what your analysis are on this wine, and how much quercetin glycoside did you have at the time of bottling, and how much quercetin aglycones did you have by the time of bottling. That will be very interesting, because if the deposit formed after only 2 months after the bottling, I think you had pretty high sort of figures.
Do you know if quercetin precipitation is pH related at all?
Difficult to say. What we know, of course, it's that pH, the lower it is, the higher the solubility and the higher the stability. Usually, I think it wouldn't be so much pH dependent, because it's not the amount of anthocyanins you see, it's more the amount of anthocyanins you have. So even if you have a brighter color, it doesn't mean that these anthocyanins really react and combine with the aglycone. What I feel like is that there are a few ways to stabilize quercetin, but this is, short term or mid term, and is not designed for wines that can go long in their ageability. I tell you that I had the opportunity to see 2 batches of the same wine. One was bottled and was treated with Zenith, which is a stability, tartrate stability substance, and it didn't precipitate in bottle, while the one that was left in the vat, which was actually a cement vat, precipitated at the beginning of the spring. So when the temperature changed, it precipitated in the vat, in bulk. Same wine, same blend, actually single varietal Sangiovese, but same blend of parcels and everything, but one bottled with the stabilization, and of course a bit of Arabic gum. So I think these 2 substances, both the Zenith or the Arabic gum, could give a sort of protective net, but we don't know how long would you have these. And of course, the higher you use, this especially gamma arabic, the higher is the opportunity to have a precipitation from the gamma arabic itself, not only from the quercetin. So it is always difficult to say yes and no. And to conclude, I would like to tell you another thing that we tried in New Zealand. We tried enzymes. So enzymes that are breaking the glycosides. So they said, okay, we try to break the glycosides while we are on vinification, which is the moment where you actually have the opportunity to break the most of it. So please, Jamie, also check your vinification, check your sulfur dioxide, check your dissolved oxygen, and see, make trials and on how much you extract, on how much you oxygen, and how you keep your wine in your barrel. So with enzymes, and then our time is up. The problem was, okay, the quercetin was reduced as can I say, was reduced in general, but you had more extraction from the skins of quercetin. So you ended up with higher quercetin compared to what you had if you did a regular sort of vinification without enzymes.
Got it. Thank you very much. I think our time is up now. So thank you again, Gabriele, for this super interesting presentation. Thank you all for participating today.
We have another. We can. You just
okay. If you have time,
yeah. There's still people, and I mean that's it's when the thing starts to be interesting. So you just touched on my question. Have you experienced any difference QA precipitation rates based on storage, oak barrels, cement, stainless steel? Yes, we can generalize saying that the higher the micro-oxygenating power of the vessel, the faster the reaction of hydrolyzation. So if you have high amount of quercetin glycoside, use barriques. If you have low amount of quercetin glycoside and you just have aglycone, you can use stainless steel. But of course, these are decisions that are not driven by quercetin only. So I'm always up to touch things that are really relevant to what we want to do and adjust, not considering the style. I mean, keeping a style of the winery, keeping a style of the appellation instead of destroying the style in order not to have quercetin. Some producer will have higher quercetin, deliberately higher quercetin, just to make sure that they could offer a better wine, their wine. Then, if the precipitation occurs, it's their fault, but still they risked. It's fine for them.
So for a winery, what would be the analytical method, or is there what's the detection method for quercetin? How do we find it?
It's HPLC. If you send me an email, I can connect you with the laboratory that has developed the mensuration protocol, and it's working now in that way. And there is a new standard even for an American producer of HPLC machines that has been developed here in Tuscany from a professor that's actually managing this laboratory in the Chianti area. So that would be the right way to go, because they can measure with the same passage, they can measure all the types of quercetin. So not only aglycone and glucoside in general, but they can split it up to the forms of the glycosides. So the glucoside, which is the one we care more about, and galactoside is usually very low, and glucuronide is glucuronic acid. So in the end, it's stable. So by the time you don't only know glycosides, who they are, and you always know what is the one that will get you most of your problems, you just go with it, and then you make your own decision based on that.
Great. So probably an analytical lab more than a winery would be able to do that and send your sample.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I think it's all.
Thank you again, Gabriele. Thank you all for participating today, and please take 1 or 2 minutes to fill out the survey at the end of this webinar. With that being said, I wish you all a good day, and I will see you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.